So this demonstration today is going to involve some code that works with files and making new directories, and it's actually up on Colab, but then we're also going to look at it on a local system. So for today's purposes, I have my downloads folder open as an example. Previously we've looked at the commands file that had some useful commands for Python from the command line, and we also had this little smile code to download and test and run locally, so we've used that before. And there are a couple folders already created, PyCache and import demos for other things I've got going on, as well as to install. But the one that we're really going to take a look at today is this code called pathdemos.py. And this is the same file that's up on Colab that we're going to be looking at, but it's a local version. So it's downloaded to my Mac and it's currently living on the downloads folder. So we'll take a look at the code in two other ways. So on Colab for a second, and then also locally to discuss what's happening. And then we'll run it to see what happens on this machine, and then allow you to do the same thing to test it on yours to make sure it works and performs the exact same way, so we can understand all the details. Okay, so that's what we're going to be taking a look at. I'll just get the other screens ready. So here's a proper view of the code that we're going to be looking at. This one is up on Colab, and it is currently situated here under Pathwork 2, just prior to challenge number 4 with the file work. So that's where it lives, and this will also be coming as a file for you to have locally so you can download and test it out. Alright, so let's just kind of take a look at the setup of the file. We'll run it here, and then I'll also then take a look at the version on my local machine to run it and verify that it works here too. Okay, so big picture, what we're trying to do is a couple things. We want to be able to know where our current path is on a system, so whether it's up on Colab or if it's on our local machine. And then secondly, we'd like to be able to write some files specifically to a folder of our choosing, and in this case creating a new folder. So that's where import OS comes in. It allows us to do some things about checking to see if a file or folder exists on the current operating system, hence the OS, and also allows us to make new folders or directories if one doesn't exist. So we're going to be looking at this code during the tutorial, but I just wanted to make sure that you had this as a reference to go back to as well. Okay, so just looking at a few key details in the code then, we have this command that says path cwd, and what that does is it basically queries the system to find out where we are right now, and in this case then it stores it in a folder, or sorry, a variable called working directory. I used that name simply because that's what the CWD refers to. This is a method that exists for the path module. So CWD is current working directory. I usually wouldn't use such a long variable name, but it's useful in this case to refer back to what the actual command is doing. So this records our current working directory, or our path, inside the variable, and thinking ahead that we want to be able to make a new folder in that same path. New folder is then going to say, hey, start with the current working directory, and then this slash is actually a key piece to basically adding on to the current working directory, and then I've put in quotation marks the name of the folder or the directory I'd like to make, which will be called Python tutorial. So basically it says wherever we happen to be right now, we're going to create a new folder called Python tutorial, and that will, this whole path is then going to be stored inside of the variable called new folder. So working on that then, that's kind of our big picture goal for the day, what we're going to be accomplishing with this video. These two lines, 9 and 10, are simply there to show us some output so we know where we actually are in the system. And then this is kind of nice. We can actually use Python to write out some strings, but in this case, the strings are going to actually be programs. So I can actually write out a string to a file, and by setting it up properly, can actually have it be, for instance, a function. So this code 1 is a string, but it's got some text inside, which is Python code. And then we remember seeing a try and except before, where try allows us to have some code evaluated to make sure it doesn't cause an error. And if it would have caused an error, we can handle things more gracefully than just Python stopping and throwing an error message. Because whenever that happens, any code we have subsequent to the error happening wouldn't occur, because Python would stop the code and nothing after the error would happen. So by having a try except, we can handle things ourselves so it doesn't drop off, and then we can try to have some messages happen for the user to see. Okay, so in this case, I've got a folder being set up for writing purposes, and we're looking to see if the new folder already exists. So on both Colab and on our local system, the first time this happens, that folder won't exist, most likely, because we won't have a folder called Python tutorial already in our working directory. So this is going to check to see if it does exist, and giving the output for the person who's running the code to see that. And then if it does encounter an error, we're going to have it create then the folder for us. So basically, if the file not found error is encountered, that means when it was trying to write this file to the local system, it wasn't able to because that path didn't exist. So line 17 then is set up to then make sure it does exist. Okay, and if we were to run this code more than one time, then we wouldn't get an error, and we should be able to see that the folder is already set up. Last but not least, in the finally, and this happens every single time, so finally is kind of our default. Every time this try block happens, this will happen. It'll write out the code, in this case code 1, and then it will close the file so that everything is in good shape. Okay, so that's a quick overview of what the code should do. And we're going to be going through this again during the tutorial, so those details are probably going to sound familiar to you already, but then we'll check it out and see the impact here. So I'll pause and get things ready for that. Alright, so just before we run this code and see the impact on the file system, I did want to point out, I discovered while doing the first run that this line of code needed to be added in. And if you notice, when I've highlighted 18, it says F1 equals open new folder hello world.py for writing. It highlights line 14 because it's pretty darn similar, in fact, the same. I've only added in a comment afterwards which says creates F1 once the folder is made. So just to kind of summarize what's happening, if with the try block, when we tried to open F1 for opening, if it didn't exist, that was going to trigger the accept block. And the accept block was designed to then make the new folder for us. However, since we were in the accept block, F1 wasn't successful in working as it was. So now on line 18, we can rerun that same line of code to create the folder that we want to exist, once it's been created on line 17. So that's happened in the off-screen time. So now we're going to go ahead and get ready. We can see again we've got sample data, which was created for us by Google. That's a folder that already exists in the current working directory. So I'm going to run the code. And down below, we'll see that it did what it was supposed to do with the print lines. And it gave us the output for where we were, which is based on these two lines here. 9 and 10 printed out, current working directory is. So this tells us that on Colab, we're in a folder called content. And we've previously discovered that by accidentally going up into the file system, and then we had to come back to be able to get to where normally we are working with our files. So 9 and 10 are what create the output for us down here. And then probably noticed that this folder magically appeared during the recording. So Colab was refreshing behind the scenes for us, and sure enough, it has created two Python files within the Python tutorial folder. So all three of these were created based on running this code block. And we're going to next take a look at running the same thing on our local system to make sure that it works as well. So I'll pause and get that ready. All right, so here we are back on the Mac in the downloads folder. And the path_demos.py file is the one that's being previewed over in the little tiny window over here. And I do happen to have it open. By default, if you've got Python installed locally, it should, when you double click on that, open up in idle, which is what is currently displaying it. So you'll notice that there is still some color coding going on over here, and this is the idle is the editor in use for Python by default. So it doesn't have as many bells and whistles as some other editors or IDEs do, but it's basic and it does the job. So right now the file demo is open, and this is the file that's on the Mac. So as a reminder, if I wanted to have things running from the command line, I can open up the terminal and do the terminal to get here if I'm not already there. I've got the terminal open. I'm going to do a clear just so I'm up at the top. And as you can see, it's currently looking in the downloads folder. So if I do an ls here, it should give me a listing of the same kind of things that I'm seeing visually up here. So sure enough, all of these guys are represented by their files up in the GUI, the visual version up above. Okay, and if I wanted to then run this file, so again, I'm going to do this from the command line so we get a little practice with that. I can say Python 3 and then the name of the file that I want to run. So I'll say path_demos.py and press enter. Okay, so it did a couple things. It straight away, just like it did on Colab, it showed me my current working directory. And the nice part is, as you can see then, is even though Colab was in a content folder, I was in the users JCI, downloads folder. All right, clear this up. Okay, so do the ls now. And what we can notice is that sure enough, there's a new guy called Python tutorial here. And just like on Colab, it has two files in it. So this is just to let you see that the same Python code can run up on Colab and in fact create a folder there and two files inside. Also locally, once we have that file available on our own machine, we can run it, and it does the exact same thing within the folder that we currently exist in. So in this case, I was already in the downloads folder. So by going into the Python tutorial file, I could then see my the two files that were created, but that exists within the downloads folder. So that's kind of a quick rundown of what that code can do for us and how it worked on both Colab and on our Locum Mac.